Welcome to A Mindful Birth, Module 3, Lesson 2. In this lesson, we're going to get a quick snapshot of what we're going to learn. We're going to talk about something I call hope-filled hyperfocus. You were introduced to this in the last lesson, and we're going to learn a bit more about it, how we can use it. We're also going to look at peaceful picture hooks. Again, going into more detail about where we can get those peaceful, hope-filled thoughts that are focused and anchored in Scripture. And then we're going to talk more about visualization. How can we redeem visualization to fuel hope for our birth? All right, let's begin with some clarifying language. There's a word that's become popular in the birth world and more popular in culture in general. That word is hypnosis. It's easy to hear the word hypnosis and picture swirly eyes and a swaying object in front of you while you're entering a zombie-like state that you'll not eventually remember. But that's not what I'm referring to when I say hypnosis. So the actual definition of hypnosis is a procedure in which suggestions from the operator, hypnotist, or guide are given to a subject during a state of focused awareness. So with what we will call self-hypnosis, which is what we're referring to, the operator is yourself or someone or something you're listening to, like the meditations that I've written. And these are used to help people battle addictions, manage pain, and a variety of things more recently, including responses to labor. To get into this deep, relaxed, focused state, you must minimize distractions while anchoring your thoughts on something particular. In the case of existing birth content, the something that you're anchoring your thoughts to is often suggestions that are only rooted shallowly in truth. So there's an element of truth to them, and they're helpful, but they're limited in their helpfulness because oftentimes they're connected to false hope of a particular outcome or a guarantee or a promise that you're encouraged to recite or say to yourself or believe that deep down you know may or may not actually be true. So I'm talking about something, and I'd like to suggest that there's maybe a new definition of what it is that Christian women can do to actively prepare for focus and relaxation during the work of labor. And it's something I call hope-filled hyperfocus. I know it's kind of a long word, but it really is the most specific and accurate label I can give to what I'm talking about. So what do I mean by hyperfocus? Well, what if instead of focusing on pain or you're being overwhelmed, you used what I call peaceful picture hooks to hang your thoughts on? You'll often hear nurses or family members encouraging a laboring mom to relax. I personally have been there, and I've also been fully sold on the fact that relaxation would be a really good thing and would help aid my labor. And I've also been in the place often where that seemed like a total impossibility, regardless of how sure I was that it would be helpful, in the face of the intensity of the work of labor. And I didn't have any really specific tools to help me to relax. And so the people in the room and the support team were saying things like, just relax. And I wanted to, but I didn't know exactly how. So what if you used those peaceful hooks to gain hyperfocus? Imagine hyperfocus as an experience similar to when you're doing something like reading a book or doing something on your computer. You're just really focused in on what it is you're doing, and so you're aware of the people that are around you. You can hear their voices. You're present. But they may need to call your name a few times before they actually get a response from you, simply because you're so focused on the thing you're doing. Or maybe when you're driving a familiar route home from work. It's not that you're a zombie so much as you're so lost in thought and in a somewhat of a autopilot mode. I would even say that physically, you're in neutral while your mental awareness is in hyperdrive. This is what we're seeking to do through hopeful hyperfocus. Again, when you're doing these things, you're reading a book or you're on your phone, it's not that you're in some dazed zombie state. It's just that you're so hyper aware of where your thoughts are, what you're thinking about, that your other senses diminish. So your hearing, right, might diminish. And so you might have to be called a few times before you respond, simply because you're so focused in one sense that your other senses are kind of minimized. So again, you're present, but your senses are... So in other words, we're talking about a laser sharp focus or a hyper focus. And for you, it's not just hyper focus, it is hope-filled hyper focus. Hope-filled hyper focus fills your heart, soul, and mind with Christ-centered hope. That hope is the object of your intense focus, which fuels calm for your body throughout the labor journey. So what exactly are you supposed to be hyper-focused on? Well, these are the peaceful picture hooks. So we've already talked about some peaceful picture hooks to hang your focus on. One is meditation. That would include the meditations that are included in your course, the audio, the script, the imagination scripts. Also, we've talked about reciting and memorizing prayers that you've practiced relaxing to. And then there's scripture that you've prayed and that you've memorized and that you've practiced relaxing to. But aside from prayer and meditation, let's add some great practices that really focus your thoughts. So one thing that you can do that we've talked a little bit about is that you can anchor your relaxation both now in your practices and then, of course, accessing those during your labor to what's often called visualizations. What I mean by visualization is a picture you have in your mind. Now, this picture holds information and is representative. It represents something you know to be true, but is sometimes easier to access in picture form, essentially, than a paragraph of printed words and content. I recommend curating strong visual pictures that you've spent time meditating on. Think of them kind of like a shortcut to truth, or a way to get more easily from point A to point B. And honestly, that's really what all of these practices are. They're tools to take you from point A, which is fear of the unknown, to point B, trusting that God will be faithful to you in your birth on a more direct path. Or another way to say it is that point A is fear and tension and anxiety during the birth process, to point B, trusting God that brings calm, peace to your whole self, enabling you to relax during the birth process. So as an example, if you were at point A and you didn't have these peaceful pictures, you could talk to a friend about it while you still stay at point A, fear of the unknown. And then you might read some books on it, which help you to begin to travel to point B. And you'd study your area of struggle in the Bible, all helpful things. But in the moment of intense physical labor, when you're having a very difficult time processing information and having mental clarity, you need something vivid and tangible that's going to bring that all back quickly and get you a direct path from point A, again, fear, to point B, peace. And that's what visualizations can do. So what are some creative ways to use visualization? Well, that's what we're going to talk about next. I've got a couple of things that I think you're really going to be encouraged by. So one way we can let visualization serve us is through something I call divine imagination. So imagination is a powerful thing. It's defined as the faculty or action of forming new ideas or images or concepts of external objects not present to the senses. So it's my imagination that I used as a child to pretend that something was real, which wasn't actually real. And likely so did you. So, for example, I really wanted to be a teacher as a child when I grew up. And my favorite thing that my teachers would do would be to read aloud. And so I would use my imagination to pretend I was a teacher. I grew up in Alaska, and I have a very particular memory of me sitting on my back porch in the middle of winter. I'm in full winter gear, snow pants, lined boots, a coat, a hat, and I'm reading. And I'm sitting on the back porch on the railing with my feet dangling over. And imagine the frozen tundra, if you will, snow and ice in a field laid out before me. You can see my breath as I read aloud. I've got a book in hand, and I'm pretending to read to a classroom of children. Now, I would use my imagination to be a grown-up teacher in a classroom with children, but in reality, I was an 8-year-old sitting outside on the freezing porch reading to nobody in an open, frozen field. But I was experiencing it like I was inside and a teacher. I could have stayed out in the cold forever, it seemed. I wasn't even feeling the cold because I was so captivated into that moment with my imagination. And essentially, you could say that my mind was experiencing something that wasn't being experienced by my actual senses. So I want to put forth the idea that imagination was given to us by God for more than just childhood play. Imagination is something that God has given us. It has many purposes, I'm sure, but one I would suggest is that it even plays a strong role in our daily Christian faith. Not because we're imagining something that's not real, but instead because we use our imagination to live in the reality of something that our senses don't fully experience yet. So the Bible says that we see as through a glass now, like a foggy glass, and will one day see fully. We experience God daily and yet do not see Him face to face in all of His fullness quite yet. We live with the hope of heaven, an eternity we can imagine, and that the Bible even gives us some visual ways to imagine it, but we haven't seen or touched or smelled it in its fullness. It's fantastic, really, when you begin to realize what a gift of grace the imagination is. But unfortunately, it's often this same imagination that's working heavily against us, maybe even eroding the roots of our faith. We imagine something terrible in the what ifs, and before we even know it, we're living in the reality of that horrible thing as if it has actually happened. We can often even feel it in our body. And we then make decisions based out of a need to avoid this imagined reality. For example, you read the news, and then before you even realize it, you're imagining if that horrible headline were to happen in your life. Before you realize it, your heart is pounding at the possibility, and you have walked through that experience very personally, thinking what you might think, feeling what you might feel. Often in pregnancy and labor, our imaginations have carried us far away to a place where God is nowhere to be found. And we are all alone, desperate and neglected, facing this possibility without God's presence in our imagination. And it all happens before we even realize we were imagining anything at all. You've heard me say it before. Fear is simply imagining a place where God cannot be, where God is not present. So how can we use our imagination to create vivid visual pictures that live in our minds or in our imagination, but they influence our present? Here you go, some ideas I have for you. Number 1 is called a labor walkthrough. So in this practice, you walk through the experience of labor from start to finish in great detail, injecting grace and God's presence into your experience of that. So here's what that might look like. You literally would sit down or lie down side lying for relaxation practice. You would relax your whole body, do some slow breaths to calm your body physically. And then in your mind and in your thoughts, you literally walk through what you imagine labor could be like while it's filled with hope and filled with grace. So literally from early labor, what time of the day? The more details you can get in there, the better. So what time of the day do you hope you go into labor? First thing in the morning after a full night's sleep sounds good to me. And you imagine what that might be like and what you might do. You might wake up and enjoy a warm cup of tea while snuggling your toddler if you already have children and increasing that oxytocin. Or you might imagine snuggling with your husband while your contractions are still far apart and you're still quite comfortable to increase that oxytocin. And you imagine that you want to kind of get revved up and going and get to it, but that you know that's not the best thing. You want to stay calm and relaxed. And so you imagine that goes through your mind and you say to yourself, no, I'm going to stay in my bed and stay calm and relaxed as long as possible, snuggle with my husband. And I'm going to use a particular peaceful practice during that time. I might pop in my earbuds and listen to a meditation practice. And you imagine then as you move on into active labor, what you might do. And this goes on through the entire labor. If there's something in particular you're concerned about, you focus in on that. And you imagine what grace might arrive for that situation. So this doesn't mean that this exact series of events will be guaranteed to happen simply because you've imagined them. But you are going to imagine these moments filled with God's grace as fuel for calm, rather than only imagining these things playing out without God's active presence. Because here are your options. You can either be caught in the snare of fear and instinctually and subconsciously be cultivating fear in your imagination and just let it play out and culminate into fear in your labor. Or you can create opportunities to imagine and proactively inject hope into that experience. Here's something cool about the labor walkthrough. Not only does this help you to be faithful in the moment now and battle anxiety now, but it's actually creating neurological pathways. You're creating hopeful memories that fuel calm. So each time you sit down to walk through your labor in your mind, fueled with grace and hope and imagining what that grace might arrive as, you're paving a pathway in your mind. Neurological pathways. So it's kind of like going on a nature walk on some path that's not paved. It's still beautiful, but the majority of your attention is going to be on making sure you know which way you're going and that you don't get in a patch of poison ivy and that you're able to step over the roots. And you're pretty distracted on that nature walk. Whereas if you go on a nature walk where there's already been a clearly defined path, you're going to be able to enjoy the beauty around you and be able to focus in on the bird landing on a branch and a new type of flower you just recognized, because you're not just trying to figure out where to put your feet. All right? And so this is true also about practicing relaxation. Each time you do this labor walkthrough, you're creating a more clearly defined path for your thoughts towards peace in the midst of labor. And not only that, but it's also as close as you can get to practicing labor, which is fantastic, right? We always think, well, I just wish I could do it a few times before the real deal. Well, that's essentially as close as you're going to get to it. A labor walkthrough is in your mind and in your body like practicing labor. Both your mind and your body essentially are tricked into believing you've done this before. And so each time you do a labor walkthrough, then when you actually arrive at this circumstance and you've already walked through it in your mind and created neurological pathways, your mind and your body go, oh, wait, no, I know what to do here. I've been here before. I've done this before. Yeah, no, I stay calm and relaxed. Okay? And so there are many benefits to a labor walkthrough. It's also really helpful, as I mentioned before, if you have some specific concerns or fears about birth. So perhaps they're rooted in actual experiences, or maybe they're not, and they're simply fear of an experience. But either way, using a labor walkthrough is a great way to pay some attention to those particular areas of fear and practicing hopefulness. You just walk through that exact experience, imagining God meeting you there. So if you've had a baby before, let's say, and your birth experience wasn't what you hoped it would be, or maybe, pushing was really challenging for you multiple times with multiple births, and you just think, I can do the rest of it, but pushing just never goes well, and I'm dreading that. If there's something in birth you're dreading, a labor walkthrough is a perfect way to revisit that experience and inject hopefulness into it. So you would particularly slow your imagination down in your walkthrough as you get to the point of, let's say, pushing. And you would be, instead of the visual, which if you've had an actual experience, that visual in your mind, the picture of and the sensory experience of what you've actually experienced is going to be very strong already, very vivid. And so it's going to take a little more practice to essentially override that with hope in your mind. And so you would slow your mind down, slow your thoughts down, and imagine, okay, what are some ways God's grace could arrive to me in this that I'm not imagining right now? And you focus there, right? Maybe in your mind you get afraid when you're ready to push and everyone's around you looking at you, waiting for you to push, and you're afraid. And you're afraid you might lose control. And you'd imagine that space, what it might feel like to be afraid. And then you imagine God filling you with calm and imagining what your pelvic floor will do, what it needs to do, and how you'll stay calm and relaxing your whole body. And while you're doing that, you practice relaxing your whole body while you're imagining that. Again, just building these pathways towards hope. All right, another thing that you can do as a visualization, I call a room with God. This practice has you using your imagination to focus on dialogue with the Lord. Again, it's a good one to use with our specific fears. You may simply imagine yourself sitting in a comfortable room and God lovingly being present with you. He's not going anywhere. You can use this time to voice your fears and let His presence comfort you. Perhaps words from Scripture are recalled for you. It sounds a little bit silly, I know, but again, it's curating a visual picture in your imagination, and here's the key, that represents what is actually true. Again, you're not imagining something that's not real in hopes that it will be real. God is with you, and His presence is available to you, even when you're in the midst of debilitating fears. And so the room with God visualization is, again, simply that. But also remember again that the more you can use your senses and all of them to be in that experience visually, in your mind, in your whole body. You might imagine, What does a peaceful room look like to you is going to be different than a peaceful room to me, right? What kind of colors are in that room? Where are you sitting? How are you sitting? How does that feel? Is there music playing, or can you hear birds outside? Is there a window open? Is the breeze coming in? And then as you speak your fears out, or you imagine the biggest challenges that may be ahead of you for birth, and then God's right there. And He's free to speak to you. And the more you've been meditating on Scripture, the more likely that truth is going to be readily available to you in that moment. A very simple but very helpful visualization tool. All right, another one, and really one of the most helpful in this practice, anatomy. You literally visualize the uterus, how your baby's positioned in your pelvis, what happens in your body with each contraction and phase of labor. You are really focused in on what your body needs to be doing. Now, we're going to talk a lot more about this in the next module, a strong birth, so I'm not going to spend much time here. Also, I would suggest taking a full childbirth education class so that you can spend, honestly, hours and hours learning to understand the physiological piece of labor and birth. But this practice really helps your mind and your body and your emotions to work together. So instead of someone saying, hey, just relax while you're in labor, you're having a contraction, you feel that contraction mounting up and rising up to its peak. And instead of just trying to relax, whatever that might mean for you, you are focusing in on what the muscles of the uterus actually look like, if they're doing what they should be doing, how you want those to be pushing baby down gently, and it just gives you lots to focus in on. Again, we're going to talk more about that next module. All right, and then lastly, a happy place. All right, so this practice is anchored in either a real experience or an imagined one, but it uses a place or a memory as a prompt for peace. Now, it may be the beach for you. For me, it's the mountains. It might be a family home of your childhood. It might be a vacation you took. It might be a season of life. For me, with one of my births, it was Christmas. Our baby was due at the end of October, and so I knew I would have a newborn at Christmas time. We didn't know if it was a boy or a girl, but I would just imagine holding that infant in my arms at Christmas time. I love Christmas time. It brings all the sweet, peaceful feelings to me just at the thought of it. And so in this practice, you would literally visualize as many details as possible. Again, what it sounds like, what it smells like, what it looks like, tastes like, and practice simply placing yourself there. So again, I would just literally imagine that I'm holding my baby and we're snuggled up on the couch, comfortable. I can see the Christmas tree. There are twinkling Christmas lights, probably low Christmas music in the background. Families milling about. I'm surrounded by all the people that I love. There's a fire in the fireplace. Side note, as I imagine this, I was in a house that didn't have a fireplace. You're allowed to add little details in that help. But I'm just literally imagining in great detail a space or a place or a memory that holds quick access to peace for me. It's just quickly and thinking about this space. I feel comforted. I feel hopeful. That's what you would do with a happy place visualization. Again, I know it sounds silly. It sounds a little corny. A happy place, but it's helpful. All right, and this can be used in labor to regain focus after distraction or when needing to escape the moment a bit. So let's say you were really focused on relaxation and then a nurse came in and did some sort of, evaluation, or someone started having a conversation with you and didn't realize you were trying to relax, and you just need to very quickly get back to a peaceful place. Or maybe you had a particularly challenging contraction and you're feeling overwhelmed and you need to regain peace quickly, and you've got this place you can just go to very quickly in your mind. All right, let's review. So some peaceful picture hooks that we've talked about in this lesson. We've talked about anatomy. Again, more to come in the next module. We've talked about a labor walkthrough. We've talked about a room with God and a happy place. Oh, I hope that you feel empowered and encouraged, that these are some sweet spots to sit and focus in on and practice peacefulness with. What should you do going forward from this lesson? How are we going to practice these things? Well, begin by using the Hope-Filled Hyperfocus download to remind you how to practice peace. It might be at this point you feel like you're racketing up a list of things that you're supposed to do to practice peace, and you're having a hard time deciding which one to begin with, or which one have I practiced a lot of and which ones have I not practiced much of. And it's really not complex. Don't make it complicated. Keep it simple. And this handout is intended to do just that. It's meant for you to be able to hang this on your refrigerator or something where you can look at it and go, okay, what is it I'm doing again? Hope-filled hyperfocus. Okay, here's some quick, simple steps to remind me what it is I'm after. All right, use the Psalm 3 meditation that goes along with this module, an imagination script to practice peacefulness. Add this into your repertoire and enjoy it. It's written specifically for you for just this type of thing. Don't forget your habit tracker. All right, celebrate growth of any kind. Hopefully you're seeing more and more sections filled in, more and more little categories filled in with color. It's looking beautiful. You have it up so you can begin to see, I need to practice more for a soulful birth or a heartfelt birth. Again, don't get all perfectionist about it. It's just so you can visually see that you're building rhythms, or you can visually see that you're ignoring the practices entirely, and you can reassess why and how to move forward with more growth. All right. In the next module, we're going to be getting more tools, including downloadable visuals to aid in your anatomy visualization. You're free, though, until then to find some. The more familiar you become with picturing how your body works to get your baby here, the more confident you'll be in its ability to do so and have the ability to visualize that as a means of focus. So look at images of anatomy and consider hanging some in your labor room to remind you to anchor your contractions to a physical reality. Again, you have some of those downloads included in the course, and feel free to get more. Remember, we should not expect to have access to mental focus during birth, which already can be quite consuming mentally and physically, if we haven't practiced doing just that. I'll say it a million times, it will seem like, but you play how you practice. And if you're trying to focus mentally while relaxing physically when doing the peaceful practices, you are going to get better and better at it. Don't forget, it's something that most of us don't currently do, and if we do, not often. The more you practice peace and use the anchors that we are practicing, the louder that hopeful voice of peaceful clarity becomes. Remember, my goal is for the voice of peace, the voice of God, through these peaceful practices. It's like giving him a microphone, right? Giving the voice of truth a microphone. So remember, it's not super complex. What you need to do is simply set aside time. That's the intentionality piece. And then you get quiet. You can use prayer, physical relaxation practices. You can find some of those on my YouTube channel if you haven't already. Ways to quiet your body. And then you stay quiet. That's the meditation piece. That sometimes is the hardest. And then you practice. Repeat. All right. If you haven't already, I just want to point out that I would love to connect with you guys on Instagram. Share your pictures of practicing peace in your stories or in your Instagram account, and use the hashtag peaceful practices or real peace for real birth. Let's encourage one another that there are other ways to prepare for birth that are anchored in truth, and that even these quiet spaces don't always have to be private spaces. So often we don't get to see other people pursuing the care of their soul and relaxation anchored in truth of the God of the Bible on social media because it's perceived to be only something that can be done in private. And so we get the message that women who are following Jesus aren't doing any of these things. And that's not an encouraging message at all, is it? Remember, don't be discouraged when you lose focus or you find it difficult to relax. You are practicing actively eliminating distractions by choices you make and diminishing distractions when they arise by regaining and maintaining focus. So when you sit down to do these things and you get distracted, don't be discouraged. Part of what we're doing with these peaceful practices is simply that when distractions come into your relaxation practice, you practice hanging that thought back up on the hook, making it stay there, eyes closed, body quiet. And then when you have distractions that come in during your labor, you know how to handle them and you instinctively can respond with relaxed focus. I pray this encourages you. Grace and peace, friends.